All right, kick butt.
Okay. Hello everyone, it's Mr. Lorimer, and so we are on Greece, and now we're talking about section 5.2, which was the warring states. Now, so the first thing we're going to be looking at is Athens, and it builds a limited democracy. All right, and so this started with Draco in 621 BCE, and so some of the things that he did were he had very harsh policies towards criminals, most of which ended with the death of said criminal. And then he also had a policy for debt slavery, which is if you had a large amount of debt, you could work basically as a slave for someone to then work off that debt. Another thing that he did was he made that the laws were equal for everyone. So this was poor Athenians as well as the wealthy ones. Now, another person that we're looking at in this building of the democracy is Solon, and he took power around 594 BCE. And he outlawed the debt slavery that Draco had in place. And then he also broke the people up into social classes. And the way that he did this, he broke them into 4 classes by wealth. And then a third person that we're looking at is Cleisthenes, and he took power in 500 BCE. And he organized the citizens by the location that they were at instead of the wealth. And then he also instituted or created a council of 500. Now, remember, in Athens, the voters were just free adult male property owners. Now, when you have that, that significantly limits the amount of people that are actually going to be able to vote in Athens. Now, when we're looking at the education, we're going to be looking at 2 of the city-states. Now that we're looking at Sparta as well as Athens. Now, Sparta's objective with their youth was they were trying to make warriors, all right? And so at age 7, boys and girls would start training for very different things, all right? For boys, it was military base, all right? They would send boys into woods for days at a time to fend for themselves, as well as they'd be, just training them to be incredibly good warriors. Girls were trained, they were trained athletically as well with the goal of having strong babies. And then at 18, the boys and girls were both tested to see if they pass and become soldiers and members of Sparta's society. In Athens, the objective for their youth was to make citizens. Now, the thing about this, though, is it wasn't very fair because only the wealthy boys would go to school, and then the girls would stay at home, and then the girls were tasked with learning to run a good home, right? So how to raise children, how to cook, how to clean their houses, all things like that. And boys from 6 to 14, they would work on literature, music, logic, public speaking, as well as some athletic things. And then from 18 to 20, it was required that boys would go to military school. And so the big difference between Athens and Sparta was from age 7 in Sparta, it was all about war. It was all about making the best soldiers. Whereas in Athens, it was to make a very good citizen, a well-rounded person. They would still go to military school, but it was near the end. Now, when comparing the society of Sparta and Athens, Sparta was broken up into social classes, all right? So there were citizens, and these were the native peoples of Sparta. So these were the people that first formed Sparta. And then non-citizens or foreigners, and they didn't have as many rights as the natural-born citizens. And then there was helots, which were basically just slaves. Now, in Spartan society, women were respected. They had rights. When their husband was away at war, the woman would then, his wife would then be in charge of his entire estate. She would take care of everything. Now, this is a stark contrast in Athens. So in Athens, when it was broken up by wealth, so there was the wealthy people, and then there's the merchants and traders, and then there's non-citizens, and then there was, of course, slaves. Now, women, they had the same rank as their husbands, but they didn't actually have rights. Now, when we're looking at the government of these 2 places, in Sparta, there was 2 kings, and they were elected by an assembly of people. And then they also had 5 elected officials, and these officials carried out the laws in Athens. And you had to be 30 years of age to be elected as a king or one of the 5 elected officials. Now, in Athens, that there was a council, right? Because they had the beginnings of a democracy. And they would meet once per month, and the people of the council could only serve once, all right? And this was appointed by lottery. Now, for the legislative government, in Sparta, there was an assembly of all citizens. You had to be at least 20 years of age, and then in this assembly, they would propose laws, and then the council of elders, and then there was a council of elders, which was people that were over 60 years of age. In Athens, they had an assembly of 6,000 people. You had to be 20 years of age, like in Sparta. In this assembly, they would propose laws. You had to be a citizen. And then there was also the Council of 500, which would meet 40 times a year, and then they would look at those laws and then decide which ones became law. Now, for the judicial government, the judicial branch of the government, in Sparta, the kings of Sparta would act as judges. Remember, there was 2 kings. So these kings would act as judges, as well as the Council of Elders. In Athens, there was an arboration. And so this is just a group of people. And then there was also a magistrate that would lead over the arboration. And this magistrate was chosen by a lot. And so they used a secret ballot to select the magistrate. And this magistrate for this arboration could, in fact, be impeached if he wasn't doing his job well enough. Now, another thing that we're going to be looking at is the Persian Wars. All right. And so there's a new enemy for Greece. And that is, in fact, the Persians. Now, one thing that's important to look at for this is bronze. So at the start of this time period, weapons and armor and stuff were made of bronze. And now bronze, it was hard to come by, which made it very expensive. And so this means that only the wealthy citizens of Greece could, in fact, be soldiers. But once iron got into the mix, iron was much more common than bronze. It was also stronger than bronze, but because it was more common, that meant it was a lot cheaper, which allowed for more people to be able to have weapons and then be part of the army. So like the middle class was then able to be in the army, not just the wealthy. Now, hoplites, those are the Greek soldiers, and then they had a battle strategy called a phalanx. All right. The Battle of Marathon, it took place, and so the Persian leader, Darius the Great, he marched his army over and they met at Marathon. And at Marathon, it was the Greeks versus the Persians, and they fought, and then the Greeks won, and the Greeks won. So also, with the Persian War, there was several other battles, and so there was Thermopylae and Salamis, and this happened in 480 BCE, in which Xerxes, who was the son of Darius the Great, attacked the Greece at Thermopylae. Now, I know Thermopylae, many of you probably know the 300 Spartans, which isn't quite accurate. That movie is not an accurate portrayal of what happened. There was actually a lot of Greeks that were there fighting, but it was still, though, it was a vastly outnumbered Greek army that was able to hold off the Persian army for a long time. Now, the Battle of Salamis, it was fairly similar. So it took place at Athens, and it was in an area, this was a naval battle, and it took place in a small area, and the Greek ships were able to traverse the waters much better than the incredibly large Persian boats, and this led to a lot of the Persian boats being sunk. Now, the Battle of Plataea is important because it led to the formation of the Delian League. Now, this league was several of the city-states of Greece actually coming together and forming an alliance of sort. Now, in this alliance, though, Athens was the dominant city-state. And so once the war was ended and the Greeks won, Athens was still the dominant city-state then, and then this began to lead into a golden age for Athens.